I don't know about you, but I've got a sweet tooth. Always have done. I like sweet things. And so I have recently come across an article. Actually, I first saw it on news. I'm sure you guys knew it about arsenic in candy, arsenic in food. And it's kind of terrifying because we think about arsenic as this deadly poison. And so I realized that this is a potential legal issue. This is a potential problem because then I came across an episode with my guest today, Dr. Alex LeBeau, exposure consultant, who challenged the data that the state of Florida released regarding the arsenic found in candy. And then, of course, the Candy Association, USA Candy Association, challenged that as well. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to bring Dr. LeBeau on here because he's one of our experts in the legal network to talk about this and to talk about the potential that this fallout could have. And is arsenic in food? Is the data right? My guest today is Dr. Alex LeBeau of Exposure Consultant, who is a toxicologist, an expert toxicologist, and an expert witness, has been involved in many different legal cases. And so today I want to bring him here so that we can discuss this in depth and what it means for the legal industry. Let's bring him on.
You've entered Legal Al, where sharp legal minds meet the power of strategic intuitive intelligence and inner awareness. Hosted by someone that is a veteran, an author, and is an individual experienced in specialist security operations, strategic intuitive intelligence, and transformational psychology, this is not your typical legal podcast. We explore what most lawyers never say out loud: burnout, grief, inner dissonance, and what it really takes to sustain a legal career with clarity, purpose, and personal alignment. Alongside powerful solo insights, you'll hear thought-provoking conversations with members of the Help Lawyer Network, lawyers, legal support professionals, and expert witnesses, sharing real stories from the front lines. This is the space where law meets what's rarely talked about. Welcome to Legal Al, where wisdom meets the law and strategic intuitive intelligence guides the way.
Alex, how are you, my friend?
I'm well. Thank you for having me today.
So this is quite a scary thing, right? I saw this in the news. I kind of panicked. I thought, oh my God, chocolate. I'm sure all of us have sweet tooth. At some point in our lives, I like a little sweet now and again. And this is quite a worrying concern to think that we have arsenic in our food substances or in our candy. But you recently released an episode and a press release challenging the data from the state of Florida. And before we get into that, I want you to give our listeners a little bit about your background and why you are the expert to talk about this and what this means for the legal industry.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, the news press release and information from the data and arsenic caught, I think, a lot of people off guard. So about myself, I am a toxicologist, have a PhD in toxicology and risk assessment. I am also a board certified industrial hygienist. Essentially, I'm an exposure scientist. I evaluate exposures to chemicals and biological organisms, and I identify the risks associated with those exposures based on what is getting into the body and how it's interacting with the body. And I've dealt with arsenic before in my career, and seeing this data that as it was presented and as it was released was surprising because it's obviously a part of, and I commend this. Hey, let's get information out to the public. I think that's a great thing, but without the additional context, it makes it difficult to interpret, which is why it kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that as well. I mean, I listened to your episode on the Exposure Scientist podcast, and you kind of challenged it because we think about arsenic, we think about it as a deadly poison. I mean, we've all seen the James Bond movies and all this where, the agent gets poisoned. There's an arsenic poison. There's a bottle of arsenic. We've used it in so many films and different procedures. But from your podcast, you say that it's one of the most abundant elements in the table of the elements that exist everywhere. So it then makes me think, okay, so we're surrounded by arsenic. We possibly have been exposed to it in so many ways.
we're exposed to many things every day, and we just don't even think about it. So, yeah, arsenic I think is a 20th most abundant chemical or constituent on the Earth's surface. So when you think about, well, am I being exposed to arsenic? I mean, just interacting with life itself is going to expose you to some amount of arsenic. It's what we do in toxicology and risk assessment and exposure science is what were you exposed to? How much of it? Was the exposure Did the exposure get into your body? How much got into your body? And how much interacted with your body? And just saying, we're exposed to arsenic, it's just it's making a statement without having the story available. There's tolerance levels that are established for arsenic in many different scenarios because it's not that there is a level that, oh yeah, you should be intaking arsenic. No, that's not the case. It's We've done studies, we've done analysis, we've done risk assessments to say arsenic up to this level causes no adverse health effects. We don't see anything in the laboratory data. We don't see anything in animal studies or in human studies to say arsenic above maybe a certain level based on the route of exposure is going to cause harm. So saying that something it has just arsenic in it without understanding the additional context or details is difficult to make any interpretive analysis just stating that, well, we found arsenic. All right, tell us more.
Yeah, I also read the because you sent that to me as well, the statement and what the Candy Association, the USA Candy Association has said as well. And let's face it, when we come across this news, this data, and I think potentially, and I'm going to maybe ask you to support this, do we feel that the state of Florida has created undue concern because every kid in America loves candy? I mean, let's face it. So when mothers and fathers and youngs, they see this must terrify them. And again, it also opens us out to, is this a potential legal issue that could escalate because of the ignorance in the data?
Well, yeah, I mean, you think about it. It used to be when we were kids, you had to look out for razor blades in your candy at Halloween. Now we're going to have to worry about which candy has arsenic in it. When you sit and sort it, well, this is what state of Florida says has arsenic. I mean, it makes it very hard for, I'll say, and even for myself to want to look at it, but from the general public or population going, well, what does this mean? My kid loves to eat, nerds candy or whatever the candy is. Is that something I have to worry about? Do I have to limit their intake? And to say that the data
Right.
is presented out there from just getting stuff off the shelf, there are procedures, there are ways to do that, especially for candy manufacturers. When you manufacture a food product, whether it's the raw ingredients and it may be the final finished product, you have to say, okay, we have specifications that we have to meet. We have tolerance limits that are based on what's reasonable for either a risk assessment or reasonable from what we can process this material to come out to
Mhm.
be, that says, we aren't supposed to have any exceedances of these levels in this, whether it be heavy metals, whether it be, bacteria, whatever it could be. You know, Manufacturers typically have tolerance levels that are established that are part of their process. And when you think about the process and FDA and regulation of food products or food ingredients, and it does not seem to me, and I could be mistaken, I don't know, I don't have all the information, that and not having the information is the big problem, that the state of Florida even reached out to any of the manufacturers to say, hey, do you have tolerance levels? Have you done your own internal analysis? Can you share that data? This is what we're seeing. What are you seeing? Let's compare our numbers. It doesn't seem like that was done. It was seem like these numbers were just put out there, and leave it open to whoever wants to take a look at it. And you're going to have a lot of parents that are scared when you see this and go, "Oh my God, have I been poisoning my child? Have I been feeding them arsenic? I feel horrible." But we don't know anything about the arsenic data. We don't know any of I talked about this. We don't know any of the laboratory methods that were done. Were they appropriate laboratory methods? And I say appropriate of,
Mm.
hey, you know what? Maybe when they submitted these samples to the lab, they said, well, we don't want to find out if there's arsenic at physiologically relevant levels, meaning If you were to put it in your body, you're thinking your stomach acids, you're thinking your body temperature, does it come out at those levels, or do they just send it to the lab and say, do your worst and see what's in there? We all know there's none of the raw lab reports have been released as far as I can see.
It sounds like to me, from what you're saying and what you're describing as well, is that the state of Florida has a lot to answer for because they've created this sensational, and I almost liken it to conspiracy theory type idea now, where this could spread and get worse, and we have an element of truth in something, but then it gets Chinese, it changes all the time. So they've got a lot to answer for, and I guess now my question is where does this leave the manufacturers? Because there will be at some point, well, there's going to be a legal case. There's going to be a legal fallout from this.
I'm sure. I mean, I get contacted often, and I have conversations with people often about. I do product safety assessments, and I'll have conversations with either manufacturers or attorneys to say, "Hey, we are being sued because they state that this constituent is in our product, and they say that we haven't disclosed it, but we don't even see that it's in there, and we don't know the method that they're using." And this just goes and feeds into this thought process of, you know, it's the lack of, I'll say, disclosure that is supposedly getting them in trouble. But if they don't know if it's even in there, if they're using a method that is not relevant for the analysis, it's going to cause lots of problems. Of course, it's going to get them, get them tagged, not only from a maybe a potential liability standpoint, but just, it's going to impact their sales. It's going to impact their revenue because people are going to look at
Yeah.
this data without context and then say, I don't know if I want to be touching this stuff. I don't, maybe we just get rid of everything. Maybe we don't buy this candy anymore. But again, I'm not saying, listen, no one says, hey, let's go out there and buy arsenic candy. But it needs to be contextualized. When I'm doing my risk assessment processes, I look at saying, okay, well, how much of this do I eat a year? What are the levels? What are the levels
Mhm.
telling me? Even potentially can look at the different forms of arsenic. If you're not aware, there are different formations of arsenic that can occur. If you don't know, and you could probably do this, there are threshold levels of arsenic that are in water. If you go look at the Safe Water Drinking Act from EPA, it says, arsenic has a maximum contaminant level, an MCL. It says not to exceed. I don't want to say the number. I don't remember it. It may be 4 parts per million, but I don't recall specifically. They look at that and say, listen, if we're under that, it's per EPA, it's a safe level. It's what they have determined to be safe. We obviously want it to be zero, but knowing that it's everywhere on the Earth's surface, there's going to be some that is in the water. So, is this, you can even go look at your local water quality reports for your local utility, water utility, if you're in a large surface area, and it'll probably show an analysis of arsenic levels in there and show what they are. So, to say that it's not in things we eat, other things, other food that has arsenic in it. Sweet potatoes have it, apples have it, many different, I'll say, root vegetables because
I
they
was going to
grow in the
ask you
ground.
that because
Yeah,
I was going to ask you that, Alex, because this data and what has been released by the state of Florida is targeted candy, but from your episode, you talk about two different types of arsenic and how it is so abundant in the ground and everything else. So I then think, well, it's got to be in so many other elements in my food.
it is. So, and that goes into the other question of, okay, did the analysis that the state of Florida do take into consideration arsenic from other sources and then say, based on all the arsenic you may be exposed to during the year, this is how many pieces of candy that you may safely ingest from this one type per year? We don't know because that that process, that risk assessment process, those inputs that go into the risk assessment, I can't find them. I don't see that they've been released. So it's like saying, you know, I I can tell you something's danger has a certain level in it, but I can't tell you if it's a risk or not because I have no idea what assessment process they used. It's not clear at all. And that's what makes this difficult, and that's what makes interpreting this difficult. And this is why, there's going to be people that are hounding and say, "Man, these companies never disclose this. I feel bad. I feel harmed. I feel injured. I'm going to sue them." Well,
You
that's
know,
great and all.
that's an important part, Alex, because when people come into the legal industry and they tend to think, I've got a claim because I'm injured, or I've got a claim because I got sick. But I think what you're inferring to as well is that people can raise claims just because the data is wrong or just because it hasn't been disclosed. If the compound hasn't been disclosed in it, someone could say, I'm gonna sue them.
Right. And that's a saying, if they say, "Oh, our product is," I've seen this. Our product is safe. Well, it has arsenic in it. It can't be safe. Well, we have to contextualize. There are safe levels based on exposures and thresholds and risk assessments that have been done. But without knowing the context for anything that the state of Florida did. And it's funny, if you go to their website, and again, I haven't been since I think over the weekend. Um, if you go there and look at it says download the data, and you click on the data link, and it's just a PDF of what's on the website. And it's just like, that's not the data. That's just more of the same information. Give me the raw data. Give me the lab reports. Give me your mathematical models that you use. That's readily available everywhere else. But here, they're nowhere to be found again that I can see.
It seems to be more conspiratorial, to be honest, when you think about it, because that data is not, it's not legit, really, and they're not given the strategy or the analysis or the procedures or the efficacy or even past data. And so I think there's even a potential that they have caused a firestorm that is going to grow because
Listen,
of this.
yeah.
And you've suggested, I mean, you're open to having the state that I can't remember his name, but whoever actually released it, to come on your podcast and discuss it, because this is important.
I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody about it. And if they are working on that or can disclose it, I'm happy for them to look at that. But you think about this, you have concerned parents. Maybe they don't know who to approach. They don't typically people don't know who a toxicologist is. They don't know, how to reach out to exposure scientists. So who's the person who deals with health in their children's most of their life is their pediatrician. So they may take these data to their pediatrician. Maybe their pediatrician is familiar with how to kind of look at arsenic, understand it, or maybe they're not on the well versed in the exposure science side, and they go,
Mm,
"Oh, I'd probably
mm.
avoid that candy. I don't know how this, how this is." So it even creates confusion when you're dealing with your kid's primary care pediatrician. That if you're trying to understand risk, they may not even know how to understand it, and because the state hasn't given any, I'll say, guidance for interpreting that data, even maybe physician. Again, I'm not speaking as a physician. Maybe the physicians don't know how to relay the risk to the parents, and it's just going to create lots of confusion and problems.
No, I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate, because then someone's going to turn around and say, "Well, Dr. LeBeau, you're suggesting that this data is wrong, but maybe there's an issue where is there a threshold for children and a threshold for adults?" And then that then comes into play.
Typically, when you do risk assessments, you do look at I'll say, the childhood levels. You look at the risk from a child and risk from an adult. When you're looking at child, there's potential that when you're evaluating a child, there's a risk kind of thought process is because they weigh less than an adult, but can still potentially intake the amount of adult, they're going to have a larger exposure per body weight. And was that done here? Was that assessment done or taken into consideration here? Yeah, I mean, there are potentials. There are, one of the things that we've done some research in is looking at childhood exposures to arsenic and saying, oh, well, I do research for the University of South Florida, and saying, what are the risks for child growth outcomes? Are there any risks, or are there any changes? And
Mm.
and trying to understand again what the state of Florida has done with this data. If they had, if that information had been released, it'd make this a lot easier. And again, when I see something, and I'm just stating a random number. I think one of them was 500 parts per billion of arsenic. Does that mean of Did they take, and you got to think about this too. Did they take one little pack of candy, 1 inch by 1 inch? Was this multiple ones put together? Did they just go grab it off the
Oh yeah, of
shelf? Was this an
course.
old pack? Was it a new pack? What was the age of it? Did they trace any lot numbers? We have no idea what they did, what their methods were. I've done assessments before for product safety or food. I say, at least a minimum, give me 3 samples, non-consecutive lot numbers of products so we can track this. Did they do 3 to average them together? Did they do 5? I'd like to see 5. Did they do 5? Did they just do 1? Did they just base all this information on 1? Did they do an average? What was the minimum? What was the maximum? And is this an average number? We have no idea because none of that's been released.
Why do you think they released Why do you think they released it the way that they did? I mean, surely somebody at the state would have realized, okay, we're going to release this data. This is going to create a firestorm. Why do that? Because they know, I'm going to go on to the legal side in a minute, but they know that this is going to cause issue.
I would hope that they knew that this was going to cause issue. Listen, I think a lot of this, and as from what I understand, is released as far as the health initiative across the country. Hey, it's better to have information, and that's great. I'm all for having information, but the information has to have context. Interpreting this is not for the is easy to do. It's you have to understand what's going into it, and maybe their thought process was, "Hey, if we just release a simple number, it'll be easy for parents to look at this simple number." But and it is, but from a realistic risk scenario or realistic understanding, if you are, I'll say, in the know for understanding how these processes go, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like saying, um, this is going to cost this one product's going to cost this one box is going to cost me $50,000 because there's $50,000 worth of equipment in there. Is $100,000. Am I getting a deal or am I being overcharged?
Mm.
I have no idea what is going into the product or what their thought process is to contextualize what the data even mean. And I think they just wanted a simple data point to report, and that's great for disclosure, but it takes more context, especially if you're having parents that are concerned, if you're having parents that are saying, "Oh my God, have I been feeding my children arsenic and not worry about it or caring about it? Is this, what effects is this going to have?" And it is going to make more questions arise. I think it's going to, if their thought process was, "Hey, this is all part of a healthy initiative," I think it's going to backfire and go, this is meaningless. This is creating more problems than it is solving, in my opinion.
The other thing is, I want to be perfectly clear to anybody who's listening that you are a parent, right? Because I want to talk about a little bit about that and your wife. Obviously, what did you? You're a toxicologist, so you know that's potentially the data is not right. And did it make you think, I'm going to stop my kid eating sweets, or did your wife think differently? Did she say to you, "Hey, Alex, we need to take this on board. I'm not giving the kid Twizzlers or whatever else."
I think, and for all the listeners, I think very simply, it's important to understand that in toxicology, the basic premise is the dose makes the poison, meaning the more that you
Uh-huh.
take in of something, the more hazardous it could be. So I'm just going to give a quick example of, I can have, 5 glasses of water a day and be healthy. I can have 50 glasses of water a day and be drowning myself and be overexposing myself to water, and that could be a toxic outcome. So it's not just the
Okay.
constituent, it's how much you're taking into your body. So it's as they say, everything is in moderation. You know, do I want my kids to have candy all the time? No. Well, I mean, we try to limit that as best we can. But as you said, everyone has a sweet tooth. But you know, again, am I letting my kid have? Some of the things that it's safe to have 5 pieces of this a year. You think about Halloween night,
What
you can have
kid had
5 pieces
five
of that in
pieces of
one night.
candy a year?
Yeah, right. So you're like, for me, it's not a realistic risk concern right now because I have no idea what those data mean. I've got no clue what any of that information means. So, when I am doing what I'll call a tailored or specific risk assessment,
I look at the individual. I don't, if you look at EPA's data, they say, well, a child will weigh 15 kilograms or something like that. I look at the individual child or individual adult and say, what is their actual weight? So we can get the actual risk for that one individual.
Right. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
for intake, for right now, I'm not concerned because I don't know what those data mean. If I cannot readily interpret a data point, then it has no context for me. I want the information. Now, if the information was released and it seems reasonable, I may reevaluate, but I need all the inputs, all the
You need
background
everything.
information.
Yeah.
I need everything for me to
You need
actually
all the
make,
intelligence. You need
yeah,
everything. The
to,
cycle. You need that cycle to complete.
right, for me to make an informed scientific decision. And I think it's important, and I always emphasize this is science is not fast. Science does not happen quickly. You don't look at something in 5 minutes and go, well, my scientific opinion or my scientific finding is this. You got to take all the information in. You have to look at it. Even the lab reports, I would probably take a day or two looking at lab reports, see what they did, see what methods they used. Did they have quality assurance, QA/QC checks on the data? How were those data reported? Was there a narrative in there? Going into the whole thing, was it done at I'll say a laboratory, an accredited laboratory, or what laboratory was it? Was it a state lab? Was it a contract lab? All those things I would go into my interpretation and my understanding. It's not a quick 5 minute, 10 minute, maybe even an hour process. Science is
Yeah.
not fast. And for me to make a rash decision based on a couple of part per billion data points, I've got nothing to base that on.
Now, primarily, I want to get on to what the manufacturers and the sweet manufacturers need to be thinking about. But before I do that, it also seems like to me, in the legal industry, we're going to have lawyers that are ready to jump on the bandwagon and sue the companies, right? Because it happens all the time. In the legal field, something like this happens. There's a class action lawsuit. Something goes on, somebody approaches one lawyer, and before you know it, there's multitude of law firms that are actually launching these lawsuits, right? And so that's a potential threat where there's now a plaintiff issue here. Obviously, now I want to talk about there's an element where you, as an expert, is going to be helping on the defense side. What do lawyers on the defense need to consider? And then let's talk about the manufacturers, because at the end of the day, it's these guys that are going to suffer.
Sure. And again, not speaking as an attorney, I'm not an attorney, but
The legal
he,
disclaimer there,
I,
ladies and
yeah,
gentlemen.
yeah. I always like to look at this from both sides. Listen, I can completely understand people seeing the data and saying, let's go get these companies are giving out safe products. I get it because without the
Yeah.
explanation, that's what we've got.
Hmm.
It's easy to do because, the state of Florida says this. That's, you may look at that as an
Must be right.
authoritative body. Yeah,
Yeah.
must be right. State of Florida did it. And it's supported by, I forgot how many different state organizations are listed on the website. It says, man, look at all these places. They support this. So I get it. And it makes complete sense. But from the other side, typically, I'll say a manufacturer should have all this data in house. They should. I always like to tell people, again, this is part of the process. You're setting up specifications for your food ingredients. You have to look at your certificate of analysis, COA, from the ingredients that you're getting in, do your own in-house analysis, which you probably should be doing. And you should, if from I'll say the defense side, make sure that the manufacturers have this information already. I've always said you would rather know what's in your product before someone knocks on your door and tells you what's in your product without you knowing. Know what's in your
Yeah.
product. Understand what's in it. Again, there should be these tolerances that are established. When you go talk to the food manufacturers, they should say, yeah, I've got years worth of data on this. We've got not only data from our food raw ingredient suppliers, like a COA, we verify the COA. It's not only believing what was on the certificate of analysis or what comes in there, but you need to the manufacturer should be verifying that as well, saying, okay, our analysis or our methods, you know, agree with what they are giving us and saying, yeah, it makes sense. This is they're correct on what's on their COA. and then goes into the manufacture of your product, your process. What steps are you analyzing? Are you using water as an ingredient? Are you ensuring that your water is filtered, or removing any additional constituents? Is it, what processes are in place for that? These all
Mm.
go into making safe products. And have they had, some products may have, what, again, I alluded to it earlier, grass generally recognized as safe food ingredients. Do their products have grass, or their ingredients have grass? Is that done in house? Are the data supportive of that? And
Explain to people that may not understand what grass is.
sure. Generally recognized as safe is an FDA process for identifying food ingredients, either through I'll say scientific means, or just kind of general use. It's been used for a long time, historical perspective use. If it's grasped by scientific means, there's ways to do it. Animal studies based on other things, looking at safe tolerance intakes and levels, and then a scientific panel or committee comes together. They look at all the data and say, yes, we agree with this is safe. And those data can be held in house. They can be notified to FDA. Now, I think that process is getting updated because of and I think what part of the arsenic release was from what I understand, the Make America Healthy Again initiative. I think the grass update or grass process is being updated based on that. But I'll say historically or recently, the process is you can notify FDA of your GRAS determinations, but they can also be held in house, making sure that those data are in house, they are supportive, that they are scientifically rigorous, and the tolerances that you establish for your specifications are met, and you have analytical data uh, often being collected to support those data. Because again, if you have scientific data with the method listed, following, I'll say FDA approved, I don't say approved methods, but typical FDA methods for food ingredient
Yeah.
analysis, and you have Florida data that says maybe your arsenic, I'm just throwing random numbers out there, maybe your arsenic levels are 10 or 100 times higher than what the ingredient or the food manufacturer has, understanding why there's a difference. Was the same method used? Was was something done incorrectly? What was the risk assessment done? Understanding where the differences are and pointing that out. I think it's going to be crucial for the ingredient manufacturers, saying that's not a realistic number based on our analysis following established methods.
Now, this reminds me, I could be wrong here. This reminds me of something that just everything you're talking about and challenging the data and trying to get the processes and everything. Now, anybody who's listening out there, I could be wrong with this, but I feel that there was a case recently and still ongoing with, let me ask you this first of all, actually, is there arsenic in salt?
I don't think that there should be, but it depends on where the salt is from. There's lots of different salts. There's pink salt. It may all depend on the salt source. I don't know. I'd have to look at the individual.
Right.
If you think of
I think there's a
general things,
case
probably not. Table salt, probably not, but maybe low
I think
levels.
there's a case that's recent. There's Celtic Salt here in North Carolina is a big company. Celtic Salt is known throughout the world. It is respected. Now, I could be wrong, but I do think there had been, or there still is, an ongoing legal case, and I think it's trace arsenic levels in the salt. And I think the point that you're making as well is that we have arsenic in the ground. It's most abundant in the table elements. Now, they've got a case on, and it might not be arsenic. I think it is. I do believe it is. I did look at the case a little while ago, and I think I invited them on to the podcast to talk about it. But that kind of reminds me then, because now you've got a company that's well respected that is now going through a potential legal lawsuit. So where does it stop? Because you mentioned earlier on, we got arsenic in potatoes. We got we got arsenic in. So the risk there is quite high. So should a manufacturer be looking at being proactive now because of this release and start to do risk assessments to be ready for what's inevitable?
I'll say generally manufacturers typically do some kind of assessment. They do some kind of understanding of what the the natural intake would be for individuals in the population, saying, listen, this is a safe amount for them to be ingesting of this food ingredient. Now, should they be analyzing for this? These typically they was heavy metals would be part of their specification. Now, I'm not going to say that's not a blanket statement, it's a generalization. Typically these are
Mm-hmm.
part of it. One thing you have to consider here, and this has, I think, been popping up for other constituents just beyond arsenic and other things, is as time goes on, as I said, science is not fast, but it is progressive. It's meaning as time goes on, where once we may not have detected, I'm going to use arsenic here, we may not have detected arsenic, our methods get more sensitive that we can detect arsenic at lower and lower numbers, meaning that maybe 10 years ago, of numbers, we could not see 10 parts per billion of arsenic in a food ingredient, whereas now in
Mm.
2026, we can. So you have to think about that. Hey, again, is it the
Technology advances,
yes,
so
yes,
the fear is still there because it's still that connection.
right. Is it the presence of the arsenic that is now detectable, whereas 10 years ago it was not, versus the realistic risks that it presents at being at that low level? Because again, if you're saying, well, it's not in our product, our analysis hasn't detected it, and other people, maybe it's a research organization at a university or something that says, well, we've established a new method that we can detect it at 10 times or 100 times lower than we used to, a part per trillion, something like that. How is that going to impact you saying, well, we didn't used to be able to see it that low, but now we can, and now it's in our food product? What does that mean? So is it realistic for a food manufacturer to do a risk assessment saying, listen, even if it was right now, even if it was found at that low level, is it going to be a realistic risk? And our risk assessment says up to, X amount of this is not a realistic human health risk for exposure or ingestion of arsenic. And I think that's something that every manufacturer should probably do because we're not regressing in science, or it's going forward, and there's going to be more and more things that we didn't used to be able to see or detect that we're now going to be able.
Do you think manufacturers are going to sweep this under the rug until it happens?
I don't want to say a blanket statement. I say there are, in working in a number of different industries, there are. It's almost like a bell curve in anything. There are manufacturers that are going to do the
Yeah.
ultimate, go to the nth degree. There are manufacturers that are a lot in the middle that are going to do, the adequate amount, and there's some at the end that are going to go, well, let's do things until we're caught. I'm not saying that's anybody, but
No.
there's a wide variety, like any corporation or any organization or anyone saying, listen, there's one that's going to do way more that's necessary. There's some that are going to do the adequate amount, and some that are going to do not enough. And I think it needs to be pushing more towards the be proactive. Again, this goes to
Yeah.
know what's in your
Yeah.
product before someone tells you what's in your product kind of scenario.
Absolutely. And I think anybody, for just as a legal disclaimer, anybody listening out there, especially your attorneys that may be on plaintiff side of things, if you come up against Alex in one of these cases and you decide to maybe file a Dobert motion, go back in this episode 5 minutes so that you can listen to the whole context, because we know that gets taken out a lot of the time. So here's the other thing I want to kind of talk about, where you just mentioned there that I want to jump on. You said that there's going to be manufacturers that go to the eighth degree, right? Where does it leave the smaller manufacturers? Because they're not going to go to the eighth degree, but they need to do something to be proactive against a potential lawsuit, because there's small companies that may not survive through this.
What's interesting, and it's interesting that you say that, is I have seen small companies go to the far degree. They
Oh,
if
really?
you talk to them, yeah, if you talk to them knowledgeably about the risk and say, listen, this is what you need to do, because they may not, if there is someone who comes and sues them later on, they may not be able to ride that wave, whereas larger manufacturers may be able to. I'm not saying that larger manufacturers would do that,
Oh yeah, I never
but
thought about that.
there are some that take that in consideration, and I've seen,
Right.
and I don't wanna say this is food, but I've seen others, if I'm one that I'm thinking of recently is kind of a product safety and saying, "Listen, if you don't do this now, this is potential what could happen to you in the future." And they've gone back and say, maybe we don't wanna make this product. If we don't have enough capital now or make it now, if we don't have enough capital to do this right initially, then maybe we need to wait for the right time, or maybe we're gonna shelve this until it's the right time that we can do everything to prepare ourselves for the future. So, it really all depends on how well you can communicate the risks to the manufacturer, whether they be small, medium, or large, and have somebody who's receptive understand what they could potentially be up against as far as uh not only not only from potential, I'll say, people suing them, but regulatory ramifications of it as well, saying, listen, if you do this and you don't have all these ducks in a row, then you could get the hammer from the FTC. The EPA may send you a letter.
Mm.
FDA may come and look at your manufacturing process. Because, for example, if you're, and this is beyond this episode, but, if you're a facility that is manufacturing food, you may have to have an FDA inspection of your facility to ensure its compliance with all these good manufacturing practices and everything. If you don't even have the ability to do that at point A, then there's no point to getting to point D or F if you
Mm.
can't get over the initial humps and do everything that has to be done in the process. So it really all depends on having a receptive individual, and and it could be, I've seen it where they may reach out to counsel and say, "Listen, can you speak to us about our risks here and what we need to do?" And it may
Yeah.
take a combination of a legal counsel and an expert discussing the issue and then approaching them and saying, listen, these are the pluses, these are the minuses. It's up to you as the owner to do your own risk assessment on what you want to do, but this is what is should be done. And that's definitely a role that I've seen before in discussions with, either in-house counsel or outside counsel, in discussions with people saying, is this even worth doing right now? 'Cause explaining all the risks, the pluses and the minuses based on small or medium or large groups.
That's a beautiful segue, Alex, because I was thinking there as you were talking, is that where do we go now in the legal industry with this? Should lawyers be looking at being also more proactive, not just the manufacturers, but should the counsel be going to their potential clients and saying, hey, we could foresee a potential issue. Let's bring in an expert. Let's have a look at our risk and prepare ourselves.
It's if I'll say potentially yes. It depends on, again, the size of the organization, whether it's small, medium, or large. Medium to larger ones are from what my experience is, are going to have in-house counsel. It's going to give them some guidance. you know, they may be the ones saying, "Hey, we need to approach outside counsel that has more," I'll say, um, outside knowledge in the vast scope and sphere of things than we do. I'll say segmented here internally, and I think it's worthwhile having those conversations and getting ahead of a lot of different issues because again, things like this, like the arsenic, things that are going to be in, I'll say, product safety, where, I've seen and heard of where people are just submitting things to labs and saying, tell me what's in there, and then getting a report. And then the report again may not be applicable to the scenario that's out
Mm.
there, but it's almost like you have to presume this is going to happen for your product. And how are you going to get ahead of it? Because that's where everything going now. Is that going to happen for everything all the time? No. Is there going to be some, I'll say, process or safety assessments that are going to be done? Maybe they're recommended that may not turn into anything in the next 5 years. Yeah. But maybe in the next 15 or 20 years, it will. So you may have to have the data, you know, now, if you don't already, to get ready for 15 to 20 years from now, because it, these processes and these thoughts are going to go that way. There's this,
Yeah.
I'm reviewing stuff now that was done in the 80s and 90s, but now we're just around getting into it in the 2020s. So, it's going to be there at some
I
point.
think that's an important distinction, Alex. You're saying that you're involved in cases now where the data has gone back to 1980 and only now raising its ugly head now. I think that's an important distinction for you to make, that to get ahead of the game now, because you could be looking at this 10, 15 years down the line.
Right, and understanding it is, and making that course correction. If there is something in your data, be like, "Hey, making a course correction, saying, "Let's get ahead of it. Let's make that change now. Let's not have a bunch of meetings. Let's not, let's generate data. Don't say let's wait for someone else to generate it for us. Generate the data, understand what your risks are, and communicate that. Be like, listen, if there is no risk, great. Maybe even publish that saying, listen, the state of Florida says there's a risk. Here's our data. Here's our lab reports. We say that there's not. Let the state of Florida say that there is, or somebody else say that there is based on our release of information. Let them release their supportive information.
Do you think the state of, but actually, before I jump onto this, I recently had an interview with Sean Weiss, who is involved at a very high level in litigation support, and he wrote an article and he said that there's experts need to stop. They need to be experts and not too much lawyer, because some are too much lawyer. But here's the thing as well, to reverse that back, it's a great article. The interview was great with Sean, but to go back to that, lawyers need to be less expert as well, because they don't understand the toxicology. They need to understand the law. But have you come across it where they think they understand it, but they're making matters worse because they don't understand the toxic exposure?
I have seen some, yes, that say, that look at the data and say, this is our interpretation of the data. And I'll look at the
Yeah,
data and say, that is not my interpretation of the data. That's not how a scientist would look at this. And
right. See?
for those, again, that goes back to science is not fast. So an attorney understanding when they say, well, we need this done, in a few weeks, it's going to take me a long time to get through that. Understand the data, look at the raw data. I always say this when I'm being approached is get me in there early, get me the information early,
Yeah.
because if you say, "Oh, I think the data says this," then we can have a discussion and I can educate you on, "Hey, the data actually says this. This is how you would interpret it. I can see why you would think that maybe, but you need to understand this is why you're thinking that. You're making assumptions that may not be true there based on
Mm.
what the actual study process was." So, again, I don't put myself out there as attorney. I don't have any legal training whatsoever, but I have enough an understanding from the experience that I have is, let us help you understand the science and you can, do your legal thing with the scientific explanation that we provide to you to best suit your client.
Where does this now also leave the state of Florida? Are we going to have a knock on domino effect where other states release false data, or even organizations start to release data that, that doesn't necessarily add up?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna call the state of Florida's data false data because I don't know anything. I don't know what it is. I don't it's just a data point. False,
I'm not a
positive,
scientist, so I
otherwise.
can call it out.
No, no, that's fine. Are we gonna have other states? I don't know. I don't know where this initiative came from. Again, I know it's the initiative, "Hey, we want to make people healthier. We want to give
Which is great.
information out there." Yeah, that's
We all
great.
do,
I
yeah.
love it. We all want it. But I don't know if other states are going to do this. If you actually, and this is just an aside, if you go on the website, I forgot what it is, but they also have some information on baby formula as well. So is this going to be a whole compendium that the state of Florida is going to release on different food products? Is Are they looking at Florida to lead the way here on releasing food products for children? But again, what's the context for that? Are other states going to
Mm.
follow? I don't know. Hopefully, and what I'm hoping is generating our conversation and my podcast conversation, everything else is not to say that Florida got it wrong, but my want is to say, Florida, tell us how you got. If you
Yeah.
look at an EPA risk assessment, it's 100 pages long. It goes through the equations, it goes through the variables, it goes through the inputs, it goes through the uncertainty assessment that was done, the safety factors, what everything is based on. I want the same thing from the state of Florida. I think that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable expectation for us to help understand risk. And if they can do that, that's great. That's what I want. If other states follow and they do that release as well, that's great as well. I don't know if other states will. This is first. I haven't done an extensive search, but this is the first I've seen, at least, of a state kind of doing this release of information. I think it's commendable to want to educate, but it needs to be contextualized
It needs to be
educational
done right.
material.
Yeah. You need to get
Right,
the
exactly.
context right.
Right. Get it. But learn now. Don't release another data set without releasing the methods that you did to get there, because you're just going to create more and more confusion as time goes on if you do this.
And obviously potential lawsuits and everything else. And we know that baby formula has been in the news many, many times with the same kind of thing. Alex, thank you for being a guest on Legal Oil today. I want you to, how was a final message that you would give to manufacturers first, and then obviously legal counsel, that they should be taking on board and what they should be thinking of right now?
Sure. For manufacturers, again, have your data, make sure that it's easily accessible. A lot of times, from what I've seen, maybe a grass, it may be other analysis, maybe your COAs, they get them, they have the laboratory, they look at them at one point and then just stick them in a drawer. You know, Make sure you're tracking your data in a spreadsheet. Make sure you're understanding where your data are to ensure this below thresholds. Look at any variance in the data over time. Are any of your thresholds that you've established varying? What is the varying degree? Make sure your data is up to date. Make sure you haven't. It's been just a few days since you opened that the file cabinet drawer, not just a few months. To make sure that you can look at the data from the state of Florida and say that doesn't match any data that we have, and you can reasonably articulate that and how you are presenting your data from the legal side.
Yeah.
This is easy for somebody to say, "Oh, these manufacturers are poisoning people. Let's go after them." I get it. I completely get it, because the way the data is presented indicates that. Now, you know,
Yes.
if the data comes out to if this is accurate data, that's an interesting discussion. As far as the inputs, as if everything makes sense. If everything doesn't make sense, you look at from the other side and say, listen, the manufacturer has this data. These are the methods that they followed. We've laid them all out. But the state of Florida has released doesn't do that and makes no sense to the data that we have. So, you know, from the suing side and in that perspective, I see both sides. I always like to try to see both sides and kind of go where the science. Look at where the science is. Is the state of Florida's science more compelling, or is the manufacturer's data more compelling for how they've released and how they've done that information? And you know what? And I'll be honest, I went and looked at some of the manufacturers' websites. Their data wasn't on there. So, is this something that they're going to put on their website? Is this something to
Yeah.
be proactive and go, hey, we've got a news release. We're going to put that data on their website and fully refute the state of Florida. Maybe that's an option they have too. So it's just a lot of things to think about. Or, maybe they're going to wait and say, well, we'll just wait till somebody sues us, and then that data will be out there. So again, try to look at everything, both sides. I see both sides here, but I see from I'll say I don't want to call the state of Florida the aggressive side, but from the
Yeah.
aggressive
Yeah.
side, I see some data gaps, as we would call in science, that make me question what those data and those risk assessments actually mean.
Honestly, thank you. It makes sense, and I think it's important for anybody to realize out there, whether you're on the manufacturer side or your legal counsel, is that you need to be more proactive than anything else with this, because obviously this is going to grow. The story's already growing. There's been some more reports and stuff like that, and no doubt it's going to open a flood, as you mentioned. It's like, if you wait too late, it's almost like complaining the horse has bolted out the stable when the stable door was open.
Right.
Alex, thank you for being with us on Legal Owl. I'm sure you're going to be back. If you want to get in touch with Alex, if you're legal counsel or you're a manufacturer, you can get him on Help Lawyer. You just need to look for him on there as one of our experts, or you can get him on Exposure Consulting, exposureconsulting.com, not Exposure Consultant, and he'll be able to connect with you there. Again, thank you for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is John. This is a Legal Owl. If you're an expert and you would like to be on with us, then please connect with us through Help Lawyer. And also, if you're legal counsel and you want to make a connection, or you want to make a connection with us, you can also contact us through Help Lawyer as well. Thank you for being with us today, Alex. I look forward to having you back. And God bless.
Thank you, John.
You've been listening to The Legal Owl, where law meets the unseen layers of clarity, leadership, and inner alignment. If this sparks something in you, trust that feeling. Let it lead you. For deeper insights, real conversation, and strategic guidance, connect through the Help Lawyer Network and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you prefer a more private connection, you'll find the path when you're ready. Until next time, stay present, think deeper, and lead wiser.